I mean, I can bring him back to life, I can give him great opulence, I can restore his long duration of life, whatever you want. So, but the Brahmanas, they were saying, well, that is nice of you to offer this, but we don't want to interfere with your supreme will. Surely there was a reason why you've killed Romaharshan. And we don't want that to be nullified, you killing him. But on the other hand, we don't want our benedictions of him having a long life be nullified. So there was an ambiguous situation here, as Balaram had to consider that on the one hand, don't bring him back to life, but on the other hand, he's got to live a long life. Kind of like the situation with Arjuna. Kill Ashvatham or not kill him? So similarly, Balaram said, well, just the son born of the father is a representative of the father. So therefore we will award these benedictions to his son, Ugrashrava, who is none other than Suta Goswami. Now this took place when Lord Balaram was still present, and now what we're reading now, of course, Lord Balaram, Lord Krishna, and Parikshit Maharaj, for that matter, have departed from this world, and Suta Goswami is now being asked by the sages to relate the pastimes of Lord Krishna and the pastimes of his forefathers. So we can imagine the association that Suta Goswami received in the presence of all these Brahmanas and great sages. And we'll continue here with the purport. So because, this is Prabhupada says, but because of higher association, like Sukadeva Goswami and the great rishis of Naimisharanya, certainly the disqualification of inferior birth of Suta Goswami was washed off. Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu followed this principle in pursuance of the Vedic usages, and by his transcendental association, he elevated many low-born or those disqualified by birth or action to the status of devotional service and established them in a position of acharyas or authorities. Going back to this consideration of birth and how important it was to have a purified birth, you can just imagine now when Srila Prabhupada, who wasn't able to do much preaching initially in India, comes to America, and those who took shelter of Srila Prabhupada had pretty shady backgrounds. So there was no question of, materially Brahminical qualifications. Maybe the accepted few, but there was a strong desire to hear. There was a great desire to have Srila Prabhupada's association. And this is mentioned here that the great qualification of Suta Goswami was having that great association and taking advantage of that association. And Lord Chaitanya clearly stated that any man, whatever he may be, whether a Brahmana or a Sudra by birth, or a householder or mendicant in the order of society, if he is conversant with the science of Krishna, he can be accepted as an acharya or guru, a spiritual master. The central point here being that the understanding, the knowledge of the Supreme Lord, that is actually mentioned in the pastime of Lord Balaram and Ramaharshan, is that the sages and Brahmanas recognized him as being the one to be known. Lord Krishna is the ultimate purpose. Krishna is the ultimate purpose of all sacrifices. Krishna is the ultimate purpose of all austerities, all charities. Krishna is the supreme proprietor of all planets and demigods. He's the well-wisher and benefactor to all living beings. So, and this was what Lord Balaram was implementing by killing Ramaharshan, making that point that one ultimately has to surrender to the Supreme Lord. And if one is engaged in the devotional service of the Lord, that is the conclusive truth, and automatically establishes one in the higher social and religious orders, if one is situated in that in that position of understanding the Lord. Sutta Goswami learned the science of Krishna from great rishis and authorities like Sukadev and Vyasadeva. And he was so qualified that even the sages of Naimisharanya eagerly wanted to hear from him the science of Krishna in the form of Srimad Bhagavatam. Now, Sutta Goswami's father, Ramaharshan, he was a disciple of Vyasadeva, and he was actually very learned. So one may question, well, how is it that he couldn't understand that Lord Balaram was the supreme, and that he should honor and respect him. He was a disciple of Vyasadeva. So this, again, is illustrating the point that one may have great knowledge, may even have the greatest association, but if one does not come to the point of not only realizing the supreme position of God, but approaching in a humble and gentle spirit. That is what was stated also in his pastime, that because Ramaharshan was not gentle, and he may have been proud of his position and could not recognize Lord Balaram. So Lord Balaram had to teach him a lesson. But Sutta Goswami, he became learned in the science of Krishna from the great rishis and authorities, and came to that conclusion in a humble spirit. Actually, this translation is a prayer. He's praying to God. He says, although I'm born in a low family, but by the association of others only, it's not my own credit, but I'm simply in this position because of the blessings and benedictions of great souls and the association that I received. So the next point Prabhupada makes, he says, so he had the double association of great souls by hearing and preaching. This is another very important point, that in the beginning he heard the whole Bhagavatam. He heard the discussion of Sukadeva Goswami and Parikshit Maharaj. So he became qualified by this submissive hearing of the whole Bhagavatam. And next, he's being asked by the sages to repeat what he had heard. So these 2 points, hearing and repeating. This is even practiced in the educational systems. You want to remember something, you read about it, you hear about it, and then you repeat it. And this helps to remember, and then you can apply it. So he had this double association. Transcendental science, or the science of Krishna, has to be learned from the authorities, And when one preaches the science, he becomes still more qualified. So Sutta Goswami had both the advantages, and thus, undoubtedly, he was completely freed from all disqualifications of low birth and mental agonies. This verse definitely proves that Srila Sukadeva Goswami did not refuse to teach Sutta Goswami about the transcendental science, nor did the sages of Naimisharanya refuse to hear the lessons from him because of his inferior birth. So the sages, both the sages and Sukadeva Goswami, they could recognize in Sutta Goswami his genuine desire to become Krishna conscious. So they did not refuse him. It wasn't a question of, well, you have to, if you're not born in a Brahminical family, then I'm sorry, we can't instruct you. You have to have your show me your papers. This is your qualification. It wasn't like that. It's mentioned later. It wasn't really considered. The great souls were able to detect the sincerity of one who approached. And what does Krishna say to Arjuna about this? Just try to hear from a bona fide spiritual master. Hear from him submissively, render service unto him. This is the qualification. It wasn't a question. Of course, a higher birth can be very helpful. No question. Developing the Brahminical qualities can be very, very helpful in making great advancement in the spiritual path. But it is not a bar to one who has a sincere desire to become purified. So this means that thousands of years ago, there was no bar to learning or preaching the transcendental science because of inferior birth. The rigidity of the so-called caste system in Hindu society became prominent within only 100 years or so, when the number of Dvija Bandhus, or disqualified men, in the family of higher castes increased. So, Dvija Bandhus, so-called Brahmanas, we can imagine that what would be the incentives for the Brahmanas not want to accept others in learning about the spiritual science? It could have been, protecting their positions, protecting their monopoly over truth. I know, even growing up myself in the Catholic tradition, Catholics in general weren't really encouraged to read the Bible. You had to hear it only from the priest. And so, of course, if the priest was qualified and you're hearing, you're getting great benefit. But for the establishment to restrict its followers in growing spiritually on the basis of some social, social positions or religious positions, that we have the monopoly over what's to be said, what's not to be said. Well, this was not accepted back during the time of Sukadeva Goswami. But Srila Prabhupada makes a note here that this became prominent when unqualified Brahmanas wanted to have monopoly over this knowledge. Lord Chaitanya revived the original Vedic system, and he elevated Haridas Thakur to the position of Namacharya, or the authority in preaching the glories of the holy name of the Lord. Although his followers, Srila Haridas Thakur, was pleased to appear in a family of Mohammedans. Interesting, Prabhupada is saying was pleased to appear in a family of Mohammedans. So this is a perfect example of one who is not received a very high birth and was accepted by the Supreme Authority. Lord Chaitanya accepts Lord Haridas Thakur. And this forces us to look deeper into the matter. If one is not familiar with the cult of Lord Chaitanya, and here's this story how, I may have simply some understanding that, okay, well, in India, the important thing was that if you became once you come to the position of, the Brahminical position, then you can begin to enter into the study of transcendental subject matters. If one is simply limited to that knowledge and looks into this culture of Lord Chaitanya, one would say, wow, how's that possible? Well, Lord Chaitanya, he was born in a family of Brahmanas, his father, his grandfather, and here he's accepting someone from the Mohammedan tradition. Totally unacceptable. Totally unacceptable. They couldn't even come close to each other. Sometimes it is said that, if you saw someone from the culture, you would have to run and jump into the river to cleanse, to become purified. So, what to speak of accepting Haridas Thakur, not only as his disciple, or as, actually he wasn't his disciple. Who did he take initiation from? Haridas Thakur. Madhavendra? So, so not only, he was elevated to the post of Namacharya, the teacher of the chanting of the holy names. So this is a great blow to the established system of castes or so-called caste system. Such is the power of pure devotees of the Lord. The Ganges water is accepted as pure, and one can become purified after taking bath in the water of the Ganges. But as far as the great devotees of the Lord are concerned, they can purify a degraded soul even by being seen by the lower-born. What to speak of association? Being seen. That reminds me of I can't remember how far back to go now, when Dr. Nick was in the hospital. And I went down there to see him. And when I walked in, I wasn't even sure whether he was still living or not. It looked like he wasn't moving, his eyes were open, but finally he moved, and I began to speak with him a little bit. And at one point, it kind of dawned on me that he might not be around very long here. And I felt a little uneasy about that. And I think he picked up on it, because he just looked at me and he said, "I'm not afraid." Srila Prabhupada looked at me. That's all he said. And I always remember that, because here, saying just by getting the glance of a pure devotee, one's life can be transformed. And I'm sure there are many, many stories where devotees have had that glance of Srila Prabhupada, or just seeing his picture. I've heard stories where they see a picture of Srila Prabhupada, and that's it. I'm giving my life to this person, and they have to go find him. I think it was Gokulananda in Canada. So, this is the importance of association here. Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu wanted to purify the whole atmosphere of the polluted world by sending qualified preachers all over the world. And it remains with the Indians to take up this task scientifically and thus do the best kind of humanitarian work. The mental diseases of the present generation are more acute than bodily diseases. It is quite fit and proper to take up the preaching of Srimad Bhagavatam all over the world without delay. Mahatmanam Abhidhana also means dictionary of great devotees, or a book full of the words of great devotees. Such a dictionary of the words of great devotees and those of the Lord are in the Vedas and allied literatures, specifically the Srimad Bhagavatam. So Srila Prabhupada is making the point that in this day and age now, of greater concern is not the bodily disease, but the mental disease. And of course, the cure to the mental disease is so that the mind can find a resting place. The mind is always in search of resting place. And until it finds this resting place, there cannot be any happiness. There's no peace for the mind. Without transcendental knowledge, the mind and the intelligence cannot find a resting place, and there cannot be any peace, and how can there be any happiness without peace? So, Prabhupada is urging here the Indian community, because they have great facility, they have a great culture to spread this message of Lord Chaitanya. And that there's no lack of assets, there's no lack of information to spread. And the Vedas are giving so much information on how to counteract all the ills in society. There's one chapter in the Bhagavatam that says Bhagavatam is the answer to all questions. So, just to cap up some of the points here, Sutta Goswami, although he was born in a lower birth, of course by considerations with today, it was still considered a pretty high birth. His mother was a Brahmana and his father was a Kshatriya, but that would have been considered a lower birth. But that was not an handicap to him becoming a purified soul, qualified not only to hear from Sukadeva Goswami, but to also repeat what he heard to the sages of Naimisharanya. So it's really, when you consider, Sutta Goswami plays a very, very important part in our education here, because he's disseminating all this Srimad Bhagavatam. And so they hear the importance of hearing and preaching, and the power of the association of the devotees, and the responsibility that lies with getting such association. We'll stop here. Any comments and questions? My voice to show about by. Yeah. That's right. Can't see with these glasses, I can't see without them.
Sometimes people, especially those from India who understand the scriptures, sometimes they make allegations that the Srimad Bhagavatam is something new or something like that, And how could that be? I don't know how that could be, because it was, isn't it obvious that Srila Vyasadeva compiled that, after the departure of the Lord to his own abode, and he wrote down, he compiled all the Vedic knowledge. So why would they doubt? Why would there be any doubt about Srimad Bhagavatam?
Well, I don't know specifically why such a person would say that, but there is a possibility that they're not hearing from an authorized source. That's why we have disciplic succession. That's why we have Guru, Sadhu, Sastra. We have a system of checking, fact check. So we have so much references in our scriptures stating the supremacy of the Srimad Bhagavatam. This was actually Lord Chaitanya specifically recommended hearing Srimad Bhagavatam as actually is one of the five practices, five most important practices developing Krishna consciousness: association with devotees, hearing Bhagavatam, living in a holy place, worshiping the deity, and chanting the holy names. So how can we say that the Bhagavatam is a new creation? I mean, historically we could say, well, yes, 5,000 years ago, and therefore the Vedas predated. But that is just a window of appearance of the Bhagavatam. But Bhagavatam is eternal. The Bhagavatam is going on in other planetary systems. So it's not new in that sense. But historically it may have appeared newer because that same argument could be made about, Krishna comes from Vishnu, therefore Vishnu is supreme. But we understand better that there's a greater picture, broader picture at play here. I don't know if that answers.
Hare Krishna, thank you for the nice class. One of the points being made in this verse is that a low birth is no bar to spiritual elevation. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Now, the Vedic system, although sometimes it's criticized as a caste system, had a built-in program to take advantage of birth for being born in a particular family, or should I say breeding. Breeding may be not the right word, but in other words, that if a Brahmin, someone who wasn't just born a Brahmin, but a Brahmin who's actually got Brahminical qualities, and a Brahmin boy and a Brahmin girl, the idea is that the likelihood of having a qualified person, a qualified soul to be attracted to be born into that family is increased. And in that way, to protect the spiritual culture, the science of samskaras, starting with Garbhodhan samskara is there in the Vedic literature for guidance of human society. So we don't, I'm asking you, are we rejecting all of this science in calling for, the ability or the power of Gauranga Mahaprabhu to elevate the most degraded to an elevated condition? Hare Krishna.
Mm-hmm. Are we throwing the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak? So, Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, according to the modes of material nature and the work ascribed to them, I created this system. So if we reject it, we're rejecting Krishna's instructions, so that is not our philosophy. What we're rejecting is the shadow system, a system that was not upheld. And there are a few incidences highlighting the entrance of this degradation, when some of the highest codes of conduct, for example in the Battle of Kurukshetra, when Abhimanyu was unfairly killed, Kali Yuga is making its entrance. When Krishna departs from this world, Kali Yuga makes its entrance. And along with that entrance, the Brahminical class lose their respectability because of the some of the, like in the pastime of Balaram and Ramaharsan, the central point was, you may have all this knowledge, you may even have many of the Brahminical qualities, but unless we come to the central point of surrendering to Krishna, abandon all varieties of religion and just surrender unto me, Krishna says. So, it's to one's credit if one has such a high birthright, but what one does with that birthright matters more. If one misuses that birthright, does not come up to the qualifications, then it's birthright in name only. So there's no value to a birthright in name only. One has to develop the qualification. And Prabhupada uses the examples many times. You can't just become a lawyer because your father was a lawyer. You have to qualify. You have to go to school, doctor, or anything. So similarly, the spiritual path is a great science. And so it's important that we have, yes, we surrender to God, we understand Krishna is the Supreme, then we wholeheartedly, with full faith, surrender to God. But that may not last very long if there's no knowledge that accompanies it. So it requires a great science. Knowledge without faith can be very dry. In other words, knowledge but without recognizing the conclusive truth. And then, but faith without the scientific knowledge that you're mentioning, understanding that there is a time and place and circumstance and how one should behave, their qualifications that surround this. These are all important elements to be utilized in Krishna's service. And otherwise this faith won't sustain us. It just becomes fanatical sentiment and leads to more disruption in society. Lokesh? Microphone.
In the case of Durvasa Muni cursing Ambarish Maharaj, Durvasa Muni was a great yogi and considered a Brahmin, and he was able to run over the period of 1 year through the entire universe to Lord Brahma, to Lord Shiva, to so many, and then ultimately to Vaikuntha, where he falls at the feet of the Lord, and Sudarshan's right there, his head waiting to take his head off. And he's begging very quick prayers. He only actually offers 2 prayers because his death is imminent because the chakra's right there. And he's praying to Lord Vishnu, please give me shelter. I'm a Brahmin and I was doing the Brahminical thing. And the Lord replied to him, yes, but you actually didn't understand the purport, that the devotee is actually, bhakti is higher. So Ambarish Maharaj, although a Kshatriya considered lower birth, still, he said, you have to go back and understand and learn bhakti from Ambarish Maharaj to actually understand the real purpose. And it's not about just following some Brahmin standards. And when he did, Ambarish Maharaj, although he had only just taken a sip of water and was cursed to death, he fasted, he drank only water for an entire year, waiting for Durvasa Muni to come back, showing proper respect to a guest and understanding true bhakti, and apologized for any distress that he had undergone like that. And so it's just a wonderful example of what you were talking about.
That's a great example.
And of course, the gopis and the Brahmins and Krishna sending the cowherd boys to beg, and they didn't understand. We're making these offerings, and we're offering we're supposed to be offering devotion to Krishna, and he's right there.
Mm-hmm.
And he sent the cowherd boys to come, and yet the wives understood exactly. They took all the offering and immediately took it to Krishna, so they also understood.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for that story. Yes, a good example. All right, thank you very much. Yes?
About the authenticity of Srimad Bhagavatam, which Mathura Prabhu was raising. So I have just a small comment to add. Bhagavatam itself says the authenticity of its own pedigree. Throughout Bhagavatam, especially in the 12th canto, and later by Jiva Goswami's Tattva Sandarbha, and Bhagavatam's own comments that Bhashyoyam Brahma Sutranam Bharatatam. There are many verses throughout Srimad Bhagavatam which proves its authenticity. Later on, the Acharyas, the Shat Goswamis, they also had, especially in Tattva Sandarbha, entire Tattva Sandarbha is dedicated to the real root and the genesis of Srimad Bhagavatam. So I just want to make that comment for you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. All glories to Srila Prabhupada, all glories to Srimad Bhagavatam, all glories to all the assembled devotees.